Pope Francis gave a 60-minute interview to Norah O'Donnell. Among many of the subjects, one that stood out in particular was that he talked about conservatism, especially in the American church, as well as the new document on the blessing of homosexual persons. So let's talk about it. So among many of the discussions in the interview on 60 Minutes with Norah O'Donnell, Pope Francis talked about conservatism in particular. I know what you're going to say. Pope Francis is back at it again, criticizing conservatism, which he does criticize conservatism. However, I actually do agree with what he says. So let's see what he actually said. So Norah O'Donnell starts off the interview and says, "There are conservative bishops in the United States that oppose your new efforts to revisit teachings and traditions. How do you address their criticism?" So Norah O'Donnell obviously is, basically teeing up Pope Francis to bash conservatives because that's, seems to be the motto of what they want. So Pope Francis responds in this way. You use an adjective, conservative. That is, conservative is one who clings to something and does not want to see beyond that. It is a suicidal attitude because one thing is to take tradition into account, to consider situations from the past, but quite another is to be closed up inside, quote, a dogmatic box. I actually think he's spot on here. This is not a commentary on my personal preference on liturgy or conservatism versus liberalism. That's not the place for this. I don't want to talk about that. But I do want to talk about what he said specifically. And I think what he's really referring to is the state of the camps in Catholicism, especially in the United States. You have the conservative side and the liberal side. And they kind of war with each other, and then the media has their own thing. But in the church, we have this conservatism versus liberalism approach. And specifically, he's talking about conservatism. So in this, he talks about the conservative camp has a tendency to want to close in on itself. And that's what he's referring to. So he says it's one to clings to something, and he doesn't want to see beyond that. And he calls it a suicidal attitude. And what I've seen in my personal experience is that that's definitely the mode that a lot of those that would be in that camp err on the side of is a closing in. We want to be open to the Holy Spirit, right? We want to be open to the way that the Holy Spirit is moving the church, right? The church is not static. The church is always reforming. The church is always kind of moving forward in light of the tradition, but moving forward nonetheless. And a tendency with the conservative camp, and this is not all conservatives, this is not a blanket statement, this is in general, but that camp typically errs on the side of, well, let's reject, or at least let's be extremely cautious of what's going on now. And there's a safety net in what has come before. So you see this a lot in liturgy, especially in the theology of the church, but particularly here, I think he's cautioning us because we need to be open to the prompting of the Holy Spirit. We need to be open to what the Holy Spirit is calling the church to do, right? It's a genuine reflection on the past. It's a genuine reflection on what has come before, and an openness to what the Holy Spirit is calling the church to do now and in the future in light of what has come before, not in a trumping of what has come before, but a reflection on and then a moving the church forward in light of God's providence and in light of what the Holy Spirit is calling the church to do. And I think that's really what Pope Francis is talking about. So again, it might seem like he's bashing the conservative side. He might be a little bit, but I do think he is a little spot on here. And that's the error. Okay, so now there's an opposite error, which is what the typical liberal side of the church errs on. And I think that we can see is a washing out or a tossing the baby out with the bathwater of the tradition and of what has come before, and using the Holy Spirit's prompting as a somewhat of a green light for that tossing out for, let's conform the church to the world. Let's reach out more intentionally to those that are feeling marginalized. And in that side, typically will err on not a clinging to the past, but a tossing of the past and a tossing of the tradition. Again, this is a general statement. This is not a characterization of a group of people. This is a typical ideological thought. So don't bash me in the comments. This is a general overview. But so I think you have these two sides, right? You have the warring side of conservatism and the warring side of liberalism. The conservative side wants to cling to the past. Pope Francis calls that the strict dogmatic box, and then you have the liberal side who typically will kind of want to break open that box and kind of toss out and kind of reach to the heights and reach to the new thoughts of the world, and kind of reach out more intentionally to those that are necessarily not inside the church and want to conform the church to our modern time period. And I think Pope Francis's cautionary tale, and I think my thoughts and what I would caution is typically the church comes together in the middle, and there's harmony in the middle, right? So you have the paradoxes of the gospel, right? The only way to find yourself is to lose yourself. To live, you must die. And that's Christ is pulling the two, what are seemingly paradoxic opposites, pulling them together. The beautiful living of the church and the life of the church and the life of the gospel is actually in the middle. And that's where the beauty and the Holy Spirit is working, is within the middle. And I think that's what Pope Francis is kind of cautioning us for. And I think that is what we would all do well to pray about and to ponder about is, how are we kind of living on both extremes, and how can we come together in the middle? Again, it's not a blank slate, right? So it's not like, one side's perfect and the other side's not. It's, let's pull together and let's move forward together in light of the Holy Spirit, in light of what has come before, not tossing out the tradition, and being open to the promptings of the Holy Spirit. Second thing I want to say, and the last thing I want to say, is Pope Francis's thoughts on the new document, Fiducia Supplicans, on blessing of persons of homosexual orientation. Nora O'Donnell mentions this, and she characterizes the document incorrectly. She says, "Last year, you decided to allow Catholic priests to bless same-sex couples. That's a big change. Why?" Pope Francis immediately says, "No, what I allowed was not to bless the union. That cannot be done because that is not a sacrament. I cannot. The Lord made it that way. But to bless each person, yes. The blessing is for everyone. For everyone. To bless a homosexual type union, however, goes against the given right, against the law of the church. But to bless each person, why not? The blessing is for all." Some people were scandalized by this, but why? Everyone. So again, I think Pope Francis is right in line with the tradition, right? So it's not a blessing of the union. It's not a blessing of the couple. It's not a sacramental blessing. It can't be, but it is a blessing of the person, right? So the Lord extends His blessing to all of humanity, right? And I think that's what Pope Francis is talking about. That's what the church is trying to do, is offer her blessing, offer the blessing of Christ to all persons, while not ditching the tradition, right? The tradition of the traditional teaching of marriage as between one man and one woman, but the blessing of each person. And that's what Pope Francis is telling us. That's what Pope Francis corrected Nora O'Donnell, that it's not a blessing of the union, but it's a blessing of the persons, to be more like Christ, to conform their lives to Christ, and to be holy, right? That's what we're all called to be, is to be saints in our state of life, in our crosses that we bear, and in the way that the Lord is calling us to serve Him more faithfully. So those are my thoughts on Pope Francis' 60-minute interview. Feel free to comment. I'll respond and talk about it. But I thought this would be a good opportunity for us to talk about just kind of what he said, and give kind of some reflection and thoughts on that. And as always, please like and subscribe to the channel, to the podcast. And we just posted a new video on the Feast of Pentecost, so go check that out.